Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Batra daf Kuf Chavtet. This month's learning is sponsored by Sammy Graf in loving memory of her father, Rabbi Abraham Yair Graf, whose yurtzeit was this week, and Rabbi Raymond Harari, who sadly passed away this week. Both rabbis taught me that a woman's place in Judaism is in the shul and in the Beit Midrash. To my father, Rabbi Abraham Yair Graf, who passed a Torah to the women's section every Simchat Torah, and to Rabbi Raymond Harari, who taught us Gemara in Yeshiva Flatbush, who challenges female students to delve into the Talmud and make it our own, and whose Thursday night Mishmar class after school we were excited to voluntarily stay late to attend. Rabbi Harari's legacy in inspiring women to learn lives on directly in the Hadrans of women taught by Rabbanit Michelle Farber every day. Today's daf is sponsored by Rachel and Ellen Seliger in loving memory of her mother Rivka Esther Bat Sarah Gittel and Yeshaya Halevi. 14 years and I still see your beautiful smile and your shine in your eyes. And also in memory of the fallen soldier friends of my son from the Tank Brigade 40152 that have fallen this week. Barak Israel, Elisha Young, Ophir Berkovitz, Achsan Daksa, Guy Nizri. May their memory be a comfort to all of Am Yisrael. Am Shel Giborei Al. Okay, with that, we will get started today. The first thing we're going to do, there's a study guide, so I recommend you use it. It'll be helpful in the beginning, and I'll also share screen to use it during class. What we're going to start with now is we saw 7 halachot that Rabbi Abba taught, and in almost all of them there was a machloket. And then Mar Zutra came and said the halacha is like Rabbi Abba. So Ravina says to Rav Ashi, first we had the problem of what about this one with Rav Nachman? He disagrees with Rav Nachman. How could it be? We always hold like Rav Nachman, to which he said, well, change the wording. It must be Rabbi Abba actually agreed with Rav Nachman, and they switch. Instead of saying you can't collect from orphans from their slave, you can collect from orphans from their slaves, he actually said you can't collect from slaves, like Rav Nachman said. Now I'm going to share screen in the study guide. Again, it's in Hebrew, but hopefully it'll be helpful somewhat to organize. I put up the 7 psikot, and you'll see I bolded every time there's a machloket and a different opinion mentioned. So the first case, because now we're going to ask basically, and that's why you need all 7 cases in front of you, so if that one, we don't hold like Rabbi Abba, then what was Mar Zutra referring to when he said this? So we're now going to go through the list. Now they ignore the first one. And the reason they ignore the first one is because the first one was a case, if you remember, you stole my slave. And then I said, well, you don't believe me that you sold it to me. When I say, you sold it to me, you gave it to me as a gift. Or said Ruth had said it, what do you mean? Naomi, you sold it to me. So, but then Ruth says to Naomi, if you want, you can take an oath. And once she says that, or once Naomi actually takes the oath, we saw 2 different opinions. Ruth can't change her. Once Naomi takes the oath, Ruth can't change her mind anymore. But the big thing was that Rabbi Abba said, look what I'm showing you here. Even to make money change hands, I hold that Ruth can't change her mind about this. Not only in a machulacha case, and we mentioned in Sanhedrin, there was an opinion that said the machloket's a machulacha. But in a tenlacha, of course you could change your mind, even according to the rabbis. Now, even though there's a machloket there between Rabbi Abba and others, and even though maybe we do all like Rabbi Abba here, but the Gemara, Mar Zutra isn't, we assume, telling you that because when they mentioned Rabbi Abba here, they didn't mention any other opinion that disagrees with him. And even though there is one, there's nothing mentioned in the sugya, whereas in the rest of the cases, there is someone mentioned as disagreeing, other than in case number 6, which is the other case we're going to knock out right away, which is, and the Gemara is not even going to relate to, which is Titol Isha Ishti Kecha Min Abanim, my wife should collect just like one of my sons, and it works. Nobody argues with him. So it's obviously not in either of those 2 cases, either because there's no machloket mentioned in the text or there's no machloket at all. So now we're going to go through the other cases. One is irrelevant. Case 6 is irrelevant. Case 2, we said there's actually no debate. They all agree. So we're up to case 3. So we're going to go in order now. 3, 4, 5, 7. And we're going to end up rejecting. It can't be 3. It can't be 4. It must be only 5 and 7. And that's basically what we're going to say. But now that you see it all in front of you, it'll be easier to understand the Gemara. So because the Gemara is using things as if they know what you're talking about, because what they're basically saying is, if you want to say it's because he disagrees with the Rava and they don't even tell you in which case. So that's why we know now we have the list. We're up to number 3. What is number 3? Shlishi b'sheni. 3rd generation can testify for 2nd generation, right? Your cousin's son can testify for you. Okay? So if you're going to say it's to say, not like Rava, because Rava said, even Shlishi Birishon, even the great uncle and the great nephew can testify for each other. Mosifu. That's not actually a machloket. He's just adding. He doesn't disagree with Rabbi Abba. He's just adding not only Shlishi B'Sheni, also Shlishi B'Rishon. And Idamar bar Rav Ashi, who said even a grandfather for a grandson can do it. Le tilchata kamar bar Rav Ashi. Nobody holds like him, and the Gemara said we don't hold like him. In other words, I don't need Mar Zutra to tell me that, not because, not Rava, because Rava is just adding. He's not actually arguing. And Mar bar Rav Ashi, the Gemara already told us we don't hold like him. So can't be he's talking about number 3. Ila fukim to Shmuel, Rav Sheshet, Rav Papa. Again, they're using these code. Oh, well, you know who that is. Well, let's go back. So in case number 4, we had, if you know, testimony about the borders of a field, and then you became blind, you can't testify. And Shmuel said, oh no, you can. And Rav Sheshet said, not only can you do it in land, you can also do it for a cloak, because you can say the length and the width, even though you can't see right now. You can identify it as all these things we said. We can identify it with simanim, with some sort of indicator that I know this one is it. Rav Papa said even in a silver bar. So if you want to say that the halacha is not like Shmuel, Rav Sheshet, and Rav Papa, in that case, hayitotfu. Again, we already know that from the Gemara, because if you remember, we brought this Braita, and the Braita went against all those opinions, because the Braita made it clear that you have to be completely not blind, right? You have to be not blind both at the time you saw the testimony and at the time you testified. And there was that extra line, Ze'akla, which seems to say even in a case where simanim would work, it doesn't. So we don't need Mar Zutra to tell us that. So what's left? What's left is case 5, which is to say, which again will go with the second interpretation, which is the father can testify about his son that he's a firstborn, even against a chazaka, even though we had a chazaka that a different son was a firstborn, and then that son that the father says gets pishnai. Rabbi Yochanan said he's not believed to do that, and the point is we don't hold like Rabbi Yochanan. We actually believe a father, and that was what Rav Zutra was telling us. And midat kafta demar bar Rav Ashi, and for the we say kafta, the attack of, it doesn't really mean attack, but the counter opinion of Mar bar Rav Ashi in the last case, which is the more complicated case. You pull out a shtar chov, right, and then you say I pay back half, and then witnesses show up. So we make you take an oath. Why do we make you take an oath? We don't view you as a meshiv avedah, like Mar bar Rav Ashi said, like as if you're returning a lost item, because according to Mar bar Rav Ashi, if you remember what happened, we said basically that you, since the witnesses said that you paid it back completely, you're basically returning a lost item that this malva had no chance of ever getting back. And therefore, if you're returning a lost item, you don't need to take an oath. But Rabbi Abba didn't agree with that. Rabbi Abba said, what are you talking about? Since witnesses came, even though they came later, you might have known, the Lova might have known the witnesses were coming and might have been scared because he didn't know what the witnesses were going to say. And therefore, maybe he, instead of, was worried they were going to say, oh, the whole thing. So he already started by saying, oh, no, I only owe half. But maybe he's lying, and therefore we need to make him take an oath, and maybe he really owes the whole thing. Even though in the end we have these witnesses that say that, again, the fear of knowing that witnesses might be coming might have caused him to lie under oath. And that's, to lie to the court. And that's why we make him take an oath, so that we know for sure that he's not lying when he says, I already paid back half. So that's the reason why Mar Zutra had to tell us the halacha is like Rabbi Abba for case 5 and case 7. Now we're moving on to the next section. This was all about how you could give to someone. Let's just remember the rules. If you're giving it Lashon Yerusha, inheritance, it can only go to the person who's supposed to inherit you. And then we have this machloket, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broker, or not, whether you can choose one son over many or not, and that, that we're going to choose to give all of it to one of your heirs. But that we'll get to tomorrow, in tomorrow's daf. But if you want to give to someone else, if you do it with the language of a gift, you can gift your property to anyone you want. You can say, I'm giving my property, it kind of works as like a moment before I die. All my property is going as a gift to whoever I want. What if you use, though, the language of Yerusha in your wording, but added the language of a gift also? So that works according to the Mishna. As long as you use the language of a gift, if you remember, bein b'tchila, bein be'emtza, bein b'sof, whether at the beginning, whether in the middle, whether at the end, it works. So now the Gemara wants to know, what does that look like? Okay? What does that look like? You saying it at the beginning? What does it look like you saying it in the middle? What does it look like saying it at the end? What does it look like in each of these cases? So now Rav Dimi is going to come in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, explain to us the three cases, and that's going to be fairly simple. But what's going to be complicated is, in what cases does this apply? And we're going to have a 3 and almost 4-way machloket about this. Say almost 4-way because the fourth is just a variation of one of the other opinions, but it really ends up 4 opinions in the end. And for that you have a second chart on the page. Ki'ata Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Now remember Rav Dimi, and we're going to talk about Ravin also. These are nechute. They're bringing the Torah of Eretz Israel to Babylonia. They travel back and forth, and they're the ones who bring us the Torah of the rabbis in Israel. So sometimes one says one rabbi said something, and one says one rabbi said something else. And that's what we're going to have here, 2 different opinions of Rabbi Yochanan. So when Rav Dimi came, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. First, he's just going to talk about the language, and that there's no disagreement. Tinaten sadeh ploni leploni v'yirasheha. Give this. Now, give is a language of a gift. Okay, in the Hebrew language, nitina is the same root as matana. So when you use the language of give, that's matana. So give this field to so-and-so, v'yirashena, and he will inherit it. So there you have the language of gift in the beginning and inheritance at the end. So it doesn't really matter the inheritance at the end. The point is the gift comes before the inheritance. That's tchila. And zohi matana b'tchila. Yirasheha v'tinaten lo. Right? I want this field to go to so-and-so and he will inherit it. And tinaten lo, it will be given to him. Okay, so there you have inheritance, but then you added tinaten at the end. Zohi matana b'sof. Yirashua v'tinaten lo v'yirashua. He will inherit it and it will be given to him as a gift. And he will inherit it. That's ba'emtza. Ba'emtza means surrounded by the word Yerashua. Zoe matana ba'emtza. Okay, that there's no disagreement about. But now comes the big disagreement. According to Rav Dimi, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, because we're still in his quote, V'davka ba'adam echad v'sadeh echad. This only works if we have one field and one person. I'm giving this field to you as a gift, and you will inherit it, or the reverse order, or whatever it is. And then we can view that the word give, gift, and inheritance all go together. Aval, ba'adam echad u'shtei sadot, sadeh echad u'shnei b'nei adam lo. If you have one person and 2 fields, and you say, I'm giving you one field, and this other field you will inherit, well, then only the first field that was gifted it doesn't matter first or second, the field that was gifted will work. But if you're doing this to your neighbor who's not supposed to inherit you, and you say, I'm giving you this field, and the other field you're going to inherit, the one you said inherit about doesn't connect with the gift wording, because the wording of the gift went for one, and the wording of the inheritance went on the other. So with the word of the inheritance it's pure inheritance, and that won't work for your neighbor, so that doesn't go. And if you have 2 different people with one field, you say, I'm giving as a gift half of this field to Reuven. And then you say, and I'm bequeathing half of this field to Shimon. That doesn't work. Because even though you're talking about the same field, one half you talked about language of a gift, and one half you talked about language of inheritance. So again, the one who you gave it to as a gift, that will work. The one you gave it to as inheritance will not work. And obviously, according to this, right, if you have 2 fields and 2 people, of course that wouldn't work. But they don't even say that yet, but we'll get to that later. Rabbi Elazar omer, afilu adam echad u'shtei sadot, sadeh echad u'shnei b'nei adam works. Those 2 examples we just gave, 2 people, 1 field, half to you, or 1 person, 2 fields, since you're really all talking about the same thing, and you're mixing in language of, right, you're still talking about 1 field, and it's just a matter of dividing it into these 2 people. Or you're talking about 1 person who's getting 2 different fields. As long as you use the language of gift in there somewhere, it's effective. Because we view that as one statement. Aval. But the other case I brought, which we didn't mention before inside, b'shtei sadot u'shnei b'nei adam lo. But if you talk about, I'm gifting this field to so-and-so, and a different field to someone else, as an inheritance, the one you said inheritance, it will not work. The gift will work. And those are viewed for sure as 2 different statements. Okay, you can see this in the chart right now. I'll put it up. if you look at the chart here, right? So Rav Dimi in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and we'll see soon that Rav Hamnuna also, what we're going to do is, this is all the Torah of Israel. Later, we're going to bring the Bavlim and say the Babylonians had the exact same machloka between them, between the three different amoraim. He says, right, it doesn't work for any of the three cases. And Rabbi Elazar says it works just for that one case of one person in one field. Okay, that I didn't even bother putting here. That everyone agrees that it works. That's the Mishnah. But the question is, does the Mishnah include other cases as well? And according to Rabbi Elazar, yes, it includes other cases as well. One field, two people, one person, two fields, one field, two people. It works. But not two people, two fields. That for sure doesn't work. Now we go back to the Gemara and we're going to see the third opinion. Okay, so this is all Rav Dimi quoting Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Dimi quoting Rabbi Elazar. Comes Ravin with a different version. Kiata Ravin Amar, when Ravin came, he said, Tinaten sadeh ploni leploni ve'yirash ploni sadeh plonit. If you say, I'm giving this field to someone, and someone else will inherit a different field, that's the shtei sadot shnei bnei adam, Rabbi Yochanan omer kana, Rabbi Elazar omer lo kana. Now he's talking only about this last case. And what does he say? According to Rabbi Yochanan, this works. Now remember, according to Rav Dimi, Rabbi Yochanan said none of the cases worked. This is in a completely opposite opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Dimi thinks none of the cases work unless it's the same person and the same field that you're talking about. And according to Ravin, Rabbi Yochanan is on the other extreme. Even two fields with two people, which even Rabbi Elazar didn't think works, Rabbi Yochanan thinks it works. And Rabbi Elazar says it doesn't work. Okay, now we didn't know what Rabbi Elazar said, right? Right. He's not relating to what Rabbi Elazar says about the other cases. He's just saying that Rabbi Elazar says two fields and two people doesn't work. We don't know what he thinks about Adam Echad and Shtei Sadot, Sadeh Echad Shnei Bnei Adam, right? The other two cases, but you can assume, and that's what we're going to talk about in a minute, that if he said this case lo kana, we can assume though the other cases would work. In which case, just to point out, and we'll see this inside in a minute, according to Ravin, Rabbi Elazar says the same thing that Rav Dimi thought he said, that it works for almost all the cases, just doesn't work in a two people in two fields. So that's what Abai is going to say to Ravin. You help, you one of your things works out very nicely, but one of yours really sounds messed up. What you said about Rabbi Elazar, you were talking about the Shtei Sadot and Shnei Bnei Adam. That doesn't disagree with what Rav Dimi said, because we could say that what you were talking about was just that case that doesn't work, but all the other cases would work. Right? Rav Dimi talked about the case of one person in two fields, and you were talking about two fields and two people, and that's why you said he thinks it doesn't work, and that's why Rav Dimi said he says it does work. That really all fits in. It's the same thing. Ela de Rabbi Yochanan kashya. But Rabbi Yochanan totally and completely contradicts what he says according to what Rav Dimi said he said. In other words, Ravin, you're telling me that in all three cases, Rabbi Yochanan says he's koneh, right? Which is the total extreme opposite of what Rav Dimi said. Rav Dimi said none of these cases work according to Rabbi Yochanan. To which either Ravin answers, or perhaps this is really just the Gemara answering the question. Maybe he didn't answer, because usually these are words that the Gemara, the Stama de Gemara says, not used in a conversation. But sometimes it could be. Could be Ravin's answering himself. And amoraim ninhu, it's hard to say that, because what he's really saying is, we're amoraim. Ninhu means they are amoraim. Ve aliba de Rabbi Yochanan, meaning there's a debate between me and Rav Dimi, right? Even though he's saying it in the third person, so probably it's just the Gemara answering. These guys, Ravin and Rav Dimi, are just amoraim, and they're disagreeing about what a different amora said. Okay, so sometimes we have that, where one amora thinks he heard the rabbi say this, one thinks he heard that. Now, how could they be so extremely different? Well, it actually makes a lot of sense. Sometimes you have a word, you're not sure what it means, and you know it either means itself or the opposite because you associate it with something. So they each knew that he held an extreme position. They just don't know extreme. None of the cases work, or all the cases work. So that's the debate between them. Here comes the fourth opinion. I mentioned there was a fourth opinion. So Rabbi Reish Lakish Amar, lo kana ad shiomar, ploni uploni, yershu sadeh plonit, uploni, yershu sadeh plonit uplonit, shenitanim lehem b'matana v'yirashum. This sounds a little complicated. Let's go through it. In a simple way, what Reish Lakish is saying is, I agree with what we just said about Rabbi Yochanan, what Ravin said, that Shtei Sadot, Shtei Bnei Adam works. But it has to be said in the following way. You have to say ploni ploni. You have to put together the people, the two people. Yershu sadeh ploni to ploni. With the language of Yerusha, we put them together also, even though it's two fields. They will inherit these two fields. Shenitantim lehem b'matana, that I gave them both in a gift. Again, the gift language and the Yerusha language is referring to both. Ve'yirashum, and then you have to complete it. This is why tchilat, right? This is the emtza. We have the matana. Complete it by, and they will inherit together, as if this is really one statement and we're bringing them all together in the statement, which means that the Yerusha and the Matana applies to both, which really means we don't care about the word Yerusha. The point is the word Matana is going to be effective. I just want to remind you so you don't get confused. Matana by itself, if you didn't use any language of Yerusha, would for sure work. Here we're talking about where there was a language of Matana and Yerusha, and then it gets a little confusing, right? And what the point is, Matana language can save a Yerusha, that we won't have to say it's only those who can inherit, as long as you use the word Matana and they're somewhere. But then our whole big debate is, does the Matana language have to relate to both of them? You know, both the people or both the fields? Does it have to be said separately, or can we just say this is all really one statement? So what Reish Lakish is saying is, as long as it has some things that pull them together, and particularly at the beginning and at the end, to pull this whole statement as if we're viewing this as one deal, then the language of matana used can apply to both, and not just to the one where you use the language of matana. And again, just to remember, you said matana for one and Yerusha for another, or let's say it's a field and a field. Obviously, wherever you said matana, it's going to work. The whole question here is, what about the one that you said Yerusha? Since it's next to the one with the matana, can we use the matana word to apply to that as well or not? And now the Gemara is going to simply say, as I already kind of mentioned, biplugta. And by the way, there's a machloket of the amoraim in Babylonia also about this exact same issue. And now we're just going to repeat the three opinions. Amar Rav Hamnuna, and they're going to be in the exact same order. So you can use the chart if you want to help you. Amar Rav Hamnuna, lo shanu ella, when the Mishna said you could do bein b'tchila, bein b'emtza, bein b'self, and it works, that's only adam echad v'sadeh echad. It's only if it's one person in one field you're talking about. Then you can combine these languages. If you have two of anything, two fields or two people, and you use the language of one for one and language of one for the other, that's not going to work. That's Rav Dimi in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Nachman Amar, and this is going to match Rabbi Elazar according to both opinions, those two cases will work, but but two fields, two people, that already for sure isn't going to work. Rav Sheshet Amar, afilu, and here comes the third opinion, Ravin in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Sheshet Amar, afilu shtei sadot u'shnei bnei adam. Even two fields, two different people, totally works. And now we're going to try to prove Rav Sheshet is right. First, Rav Sheshet's going to do it himself. He's not going to succeed. In fact, it's very interesting. He's going to bring a proof for his opinion. He's going to say, this is where I get my opinion from, which really does two things. Number one, it says, here's a bright that proves my opinion. Number two, it knocks out the other approaches. But then he's going to say, but you know what? It's being very honest, intellectually honest, I can actually explain that bright to fit in with the other opinions. In which case, his whole support is really he's going to knock out himself. Then we're going to bring Rav Ashi, who's going to prove Rav Sheshet from a different Braita. And then the Gemara is going to say, well, you might have thought you could explain it the same way Rav Sheshet explained the other Braita, but you can't. And in which case, we're going to be left with, we do have a proof for Rav Sheshet. And that's just going to lead the Gemara, I'm kind of giving you the whole rest of the flow of the Gemara, to say, wait a minute, but don't we know from somewhere else that we hold like Reish Lakish and not like this opinion? And then they're going to have to resolve that as well. So that's our structure till almost the end of the daf. Amar Rav Sheshet, Mina Minala. So what's my proof for my opinion? Well, we're going to do both him and Rav Ashi are going to bring Braitot. Some of the elements of the Braitot are very critical for our topic. Some are totally off topic. So I'm going to kind of help you focus in as I read it on what we need to know, what's not critical. We're going to explain it anyway, but not critical for our sugya particularly. Because both of these are totally different cases. It's just they relate to our sugya in an indirect way. Rav Sheshet says, Ditanya, ha'omer tnu shekel libni b'Shabbat. Somebody before they die says, listen, when I die, I want you to give a shekel to my children, not on Shabbat, b'Shabbat, but every week. Shabbat means a week. Okay, Hayom Yom Rishon b'Shabbat, right? We've seen this many times. That's what we say in Shiur Shal Yom. This is the first day of the week. Shabbat is a week. Sheva Yemei Shabbata in Echad Mi Yodea, right? There's 7 days of the week. So he says, I want you to give 1 shekel to my children per week as an allowance. But by the time he dies, inflation, and they can't live on this shekel. They need a sela, which is 2 shekalim. No tein lahem sela. So the person in charge can take the liberty to say, obviously the father meant what they need to survive. If they need 2 shekalim, let's give 2 shekalim, we'll give them 2 shekalim. But imamal, now this isn't important for our purposes yet, really. But imamal, al titnu lahem ela shekel, ein notnim lahem ela shekel. But if he said, don't give them but a shekel, meaning only give them a shekel, no more than a shekel. Well, in that case, ein notnim lahem ela shekel. We learned this, by the way. And he said, we learned it in Ketubot. Then he obviously meant, I only want you giving them a shekel. I don't care about inflation. I don't care what they need to live on. That's all I want you to give them. Now, here comes the more important part for our purposes, because that's all it heirs, and it happens. What's important, we're going to see later, is he uses the language of litain. What's litain? Matana, to give, gift. Ve'im amal, im metu, if he says, okay, now here's the important part. He started his sentence with tnu shekel libani, okay, give my sons a shekel every week. If he says, but if they die, instead of what should happen if they die, their heirs should get it, whether they have children or whoever their heirs would be, their uncle, okay, whoever would be next in line. But instead of doing that, Yershu, okay, notice language of Yerusha, we're now turning to Amud Bet, Acherim taftehem. Other people will inherit in place of them, meaning while they're alive, give them a shekel allowance a week. When they die, I want all my inheritance to be given as a gift, but he didn't say give as a gift, right? Only if he said give as a gift would it work. Or if he used the language of gift in there somewhere, then it would work, depending on, now what's this case? This is 2 different people, and you would call this 2 fields. Why would you call this 2 fields, even though it's all part of one inheritance? So when we say 2 fields, what we mean is, I know we're still in the middle of the sentence. We didn't say yet what's going to happen, but I want to already get to why it's similar. When we say 2 fields, we mean in one statement you say, I'm giving half the field, I'm giving this field to Ruth and this field to Naomi, right? That's 2 fields and 2 people. But if you say 1 field with 2 people, what you mean is I'm giving half of it to Ruth and half of it to Naomi. Now that's not what's going on here. You're not giving half to one and half to the other, really, because you're giving them all at the same time. In our case, the Rashbam explains this. Why is it viewed like 2 people in 2 fields, even though you're talking about one inheritance of the father that's giving some to one person and then later whatever's left to the other? Because it's happening at 2 different times. It's not like I'm giving both, I'm giving this one field half to you now, but it's happening at different times in time, which really qualifies it, even though, again, one could argue with this, qualifies it as 2 fields and 2 people, because you're really talking about, first of all, so they're each going to get different parts of the inheritance. So it really is, to a certain extent, 2 fields. That's why they're going to say it's like 2 fields. Now let's see what happens here. If you say, and again, the topic of this braita has nothing to do with our topic. What we want to know is, can you give more than a shekel to the children if they need it? That's the issue of the braita. It's not our issue at all. But what's assumed or presumed in the braita is our issue, which is, if you say give them a shekel, okay, or only give them a shekel, no more than a shekel, and after I die, I want you to give it to my neighbor, ben shamar tnu, ben shamar al titnu, it doesn't matter what language the father used, give them a shekel a week, or don't give them more than a shekel a week, ein notnim lahem ela shekel, they only get a shekel, because the father obviously wanted to give the neighbor, or whoever this is, his inheritance. So he doesn't want to deplete all the money in the inheritance. And therefore, he meant really only a shekel. So again, the laws of that braita aren't really important to us. However, what do we say here? This is like a case, right? It's like a case where he said, give to my son this, who anyway, you didn't need to use the language of gift because son inherits anyway. And then Yershu achirim, others will inherit. Now, others can't inherit, right? Unless you give it to them in the language of a gift. But what do you see here? The fact that you can't give the kids more than a shekel obviously holds that the inheritance, whatever you have left when the sons die, will go to your neighbor. And that works. Vikatane dekane. And it says here, dekane, it works. It's koneh. Those people will inherit. So therefore, two sadot, two bnei adam works. Well, who motiv lava who mafarik. Now, even though he brought this as a difficulty on all the other opinions who said it doesn't work, he's going to explain this braita in a way that works with everybody else. It wasn't your neighbor you were trying to give it to after. When you said Yeshua Chirim Tachtehem, what did you mean? You meant Mivbira Oili Yoshov, Rabbi Yochanan ben Barokahi. You must have been talking about, let's say you said, I want to give this, give my sons, maybe son A and son B, son 1 and 2, give them a shekel a week. And after they die, give all my property to son number 3 or something like that. And it was Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka, and we're all talking about potential heirs of his, not random people. Now, why does that matter? Or by the way, this could be the other interpretation of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka, which we're going to see this all tomorrow. There's 2 interpretations. Maybe Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka thinks that you could actually decide to give all your inheritance to, as long as someone is theoretically in line, even though they're not the son, but they're a brother. And maybe he said, give my sons a shekel a week, but as soon as they die, I don't want it to go to their sons. I want it to be given as a gift to my brother. But again, when he talked about the brother, he used the language of Yerusha. Why would that work? Because according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka, Yerusha works for anyone who's in line, even if they're not directly in line, and it's not their turn yet. But it could work. Okay, those are 2 different interpretations of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka, which we'll see in the next step. But the point is, you can explain this braita according to one of those ways of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka, and therefore this doesn't prove anything. Because for Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka, that case, you wouldn't need language of matana at all. So therefore, this doesn't teach you anything about the matana, the language of matana combined with Yerusha and the 2 people case. It's not relevant. Next case, which again, we're going to try to do the same thing after we have Rav Ashi's proof to try to say maybe it's Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka, but then we're going to say it doesn't work to say that. In which case, I'm telling you this because it's going to get a little complicated, or you'll forget what we're up to. In any case, in the end, Rav Ashi is going to prove Rav Sheshet's opinion. I'm Rav Ashi. Tashma. Let's learn from here. Now, this case is a little trickier because it's missing an important word. It's missing the word nitina. Okay, a person said the following, and it's a little similar to the previous, but not exactly. Nichasai lecha. You say to a random person, my possessions will go to you. Now, you're missing the verb here. Nichasai lecha literally translate as, my property is yours. Okay, is, I guess, is there. But you're missing the word is given, is going to be bequeathed to you, right? We're missing the inherit word and the giving word. The question is, what did you mean here? Now, we assume, when you said, especially if you're talking to a random person, my property is given to you. My property is to you. Usually you would fill in with is given to you. Okay, so they're going to assume that's the lashon of matana here. Va'acharecha yirash ploni. Now, in the next phrase, you already use the language of Yerusha. And after you, okay, meaning again, what's happening? I'm giving it to, let's say, my next door neighbor. And I say, listen, I'm giving you my field for when I die. But when you die, I don't want it going to your heirs. I want it going, you have a lot of friends. So I want it going to your next door neighbor. And after that person dies, I want it going to the next neighbor. Okay, that's basically what you're doing here. But again, you mix languages here because you started with nichasai lecha, which we assume, again, I'm just using this as an assumption. The Gemara assumes you said nitina, because otherwise there would be nothing to talk about here. Because if there was no language of nitina, I can't just do that with relatives, with non-relatives. So nichasai lecha v'acharecha yirash ploni v'acharecha yirash ploni. Okay, so first it will go to number 1, then it will go to number 2, right? Number 1 will give it to number 2. Number 2, when they die, will give it to number 3. Or number 3 will inherit number 2, and number 2 will inherit number 1 first. So that's what he's saying. So the simple halacha is this works. Mate rishon kana sheni. Mate sheni kana shlishi. So when the first one dies, the second one acquires. When the second one dies, the third one acquires it. Even though, okay, now, but before we get to the second part, which isn't so connected or not really related at all to our topic, but this already shows what? That if this third person can inherit from the second, even though, right, and the second can inherit from the first, even though there was a language of Yerusha and they were non-relatives, we're assuming. Again, this is a case like the previous of 2 sadot, or 3 sadot here, because there's 3 different times that each one is inheriting. So we view that as separate transactions and 3 separate people. So it shouldn't work according to everyone else other than Rav Sheshet. But yet we see this works, and that's our proof. But in any case, we're going to read the next case of the Braita, even though it's not so relevant for our purposes. Ve'imet sheni b'chayei rishon. But what happens if First, the second person dies. So when the first person dies, there is no second person that he's supposed to be passing it on to. Now, you could say, so it goes to number 3, but it doesn't. Because what did the person say? It'll go to number 2, and number 2 will pass it on to number 3, but number 2 never got it to pass on to number 3. So number 3 doesn't get it. It goes, it goes to the heirs of the first. Because it never went to the second, because the second was dead already, it never goes to the third, because it has to go to the second in order to get to the third. Okay, that's not connected to our topic, but it happens to be part of this source. Now, again, the Gemara says, which I told you before, I just wanted to do it when we were there, but now, this is like 2 fields and 2 people, or 3 fields and 3 people, and it's effective. Now, if you want to try to say, so now we're going to suggest that maybe we'll answer the same thing that we said for Rav Sheshet before, that Rav Sheshet answered, to support all the other opinions. And maybe these aren't 3 random people. Maybe they're your relatives. And it's Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. And maybe what you said is, I want to give it to my first son. And when he dies, I want it to go to my second son. And when he dies, I want it to go to my third son, rather than it going to my first son's heirs. Maybe that's what he was saying. And then it would have to be according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, because the rabbis don't think you could do that at all. The rabbis say, what do you mean? Laws of inheritance of the Torah, all the sons get equal. You can't just override that. So if that's the case, right? So now we're going to say, and then that would resolve it. But we're going to say, no, you can't say that. Why not? Because something doesn't work here. Meit sheni kanash lishi, the part that says that the second one's going to inherit and inherit also to be able to pass it on to the third is just not true. In that, if it's brothers, why is that? Hashalach Rav Acha bereid Rav Avia. Rav Acha sent the following halacha to Rav Acha, the son of Rav Avia, sent the following halacha that said, L'divrei Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, who says basically you could choose one son over all the others, Nechasai lecha v'acharecha leploni, v'rishon ra'oi liyorsho, if you said, my nechasim go to you, and after you to someone else, and the first one happens to be someone who can inherit, who's one of your heirs, like your son, your direct heir, ein l'sheni b'mkom rishon klum. In that case, for sure, it's not effective, what you said about the second. Why is that? She'ein ze lashon matana ela lashon yerusha. The first thing we say is, now here goes back to what I said. Nechasai lecha, there's something missing. What's missing? The word nitina. Now, why did we assume it meant nitina? Because we're giving it to a random person, and it wouldn't be effective if you said yerusha. We assume that you don't just say words that are totally ineffective. But when it's your heir and you don't need to use the language of matana, then it means Yerusha, nechasai lecha. You're missing that word and we have to fill it in. If you say my property is to you, to your child who's supposed to inherit you, obviously you meant inheritance as inheritance. Okay, so what? So why can't you give your property as inheritance to one son and say, but when I die, it'll go to the second son, and when you die, it'll go to the second son, and when you die, it'll go to the third? Well, you can't. Why? Yerusha ein lahefsek. Once you inherit something, a gift, you could give a gift for a certain period of time, for your lifetime, for something, for 10 years, whatever you want. When you give inheritance and it's someone who can inherit you and it's effective forever. You can't stop that and say, oh, but when you die, it's going to go to someone else. That doesn't work that way. So therefore, okay, this is all a matter of translating this word nechasai and the missing word here. What verb did you mean? And that's going to depend on the context of your words. If it was for someone else, it would be matana. If it was for your heirs, it would be yerusha. So comes the Gemara and says, you can't possibly then say this is someone who could have inherited you, because if so, it wouldn't have gone to the second person. And this Braita says it does go, which means this Braita definitely is talking about somebody else. In which case, we have matana in the beginning, because in that context, it would be matana. We have yerusha for the other two. We have 2 fields or 3 fields, 3 people, and it works. And there you have Rav Sheshet. So tiyufta dekulu tiyufta. So this is a complete knockout to all the other opinions, which means we hold like Rav Sheshet and Rav in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. To which the Gemara says, which I told you we get to this, lema tavi tiyufta de Reish Lakish. Well, this should then knock out Reish Lakish's position also, which, okay, so yeah, okay, it does. But that's a problem. How could you really say that? Because In Yevamot, Daf Lamed Vav Amud Aleph, Rava said, the halacha is like Reish Lakish in three things. And this was one of them. Okay, I'll give you very quickly the other two. One is kinyan pero kinyan aguf. Someone has the rights to the proceeds, right? It is kinyan aguf, or it's not kinyan aguf, now I forget. But something about kinyan pero being kinyan aguf. If you have the rights to the produce, the proceeds, and you sell it, is that an effective sale or not? Can you do that or not? And the other is a very interesting case. You do chalitza with a woman. Okay, a person dies without children. The brother does chalitza with a woman, but then it turns out she was pregnant. And you can't do chalitza with a pregnant woman because, right, you wait to see if she has a child, but you didn't know she was pregnant, so you did chalitza anyway. And then if she miscarries, now if she has a child, of course, the chalitza was just invalid and you move on, she doesn't need chalitza. But if she ends up miscarrying and doesn't have a child, then she's actually obligated in chalitza, and you actually have to do chalitza again because the chalitza wasn't valid because she was pregnant at the time, and therefore you have to do a new chalitza. Unfortunately for this woman, hard enough to do chalitza, now you have to do it twice. But that's the situation. Now, that's why usually we wait to see if she's really pregnant, right? If you wait a few months to make sure. Now the Gemara says, so if that's the case, and the third one is our case, so if we paskin like Reish Lakish, how can we have this Batra? How can we paskin like him if there's a Batra that contradicts his opinion? For this, we're going to get a little off on a sidetrack and finish up the daf with this sidetrack. Lo kasha kamatok kadei dibor kan la'achar kadei dibor. Now, until now, we've been talking about this language of Yerusha and gift and being said in this statement. Now, Reish Lakish had said you need to really bring them all together, right? You need to start with the fact that they're together, have them, right? And kind of bring it all together if this is all one statement. Well, and that seems to go against this Braita that doesn't do that. The language in this Braita doesn't do it at all. It doesn't mix the language of Yerusha, and you inherit them together at the end. It doesn't say anything to bring them together. So Reish Lakish is going to distinguish between something you said immediately. If the whole statement was said within a certain period of time, right? The time it takes to say Shalom Alecha Rabbi Mori, and there's no break, you don't take a deep breath and stop in between parts of the statement. Like, I'm giving my property to so-and-so, and after to this person, and then, and you have like a big break in the middle, that would not be Tok Kedei Dibur. But if you said it all Tok Kedei Dibur and just kept talking without a break, then it's viewed as one statement in any case, according to Reish Lakish. Even two fields, two Bnei Adam, it doesn't matter. It's all one statement. He only added that you have to have this connecting them back together if you took these big breaks in between the sections. And then the Yerusha and the Matana wouldn't be connected unless you reconnected them at the end and said, and yes, you both will inherit together, or somehow put them together. So in making this distinction between Tok Kedei Dibur, La'achar Kedei Dibur, now the Gemara is going to go off on a small tangent. Hilchata, Kol Tok Kedei Dibur, and that's how basically we can hold like Reish Lakish, because he doesn't really disagree with Rabbi Yochanan. He only disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan if there's a break of Tok Kedei Dibur. And that's basically how we would explain the Braita that goes against. The Braita is Tok Kedei Dibur. Reish Lakish was talking about if it wasn't Tok Kedei Dibur and you had a break. So for that, we're going to end with this one last line, which goes off on a tangent about Tok Kedei Dibur. Hilchata Kol Tok Kedei Dibur Kedibur Dami. Anytime you say something within a very small frame of time, the time it takes to say Shalom Alecha Rabbi Umori, or some people say Shalom Alecha Rabbi, it depends on all sorts of differentiations about that, but we're not going to get into that. But anytime you correct yourself immediately or say some statement, right, we view this all as one whole. Tok Kedei Dibur is really as if you're still in the same statement and you can correct anything, change anything you want. Other than two things. Leva me'avodah zarah v'kiddushin. Interesting machloket about what it means by avodah zarah. Some people think it means that if you said, I'm designating this item for avodah zarah worship, there's something called hukseh avodah zarah, and it's considered an object of avodah zarah. So there's all sorts of halachot, like in etrog that was used for avodah zarah, can't be used in etrog, or there's all sorts of halachot that come up. So once it's designated, even if you say immediately, oh no, I didn't mean that, too late. Okay, and that's because of the chumrah of avodah zarah. Some people say it means something very different. If you said about an idol or something, this is my God, you get stoned. And if you say, this is my God, and they say, oh, no, I changed my mind, I didn't mean that, too late, you get stoned. That's a big difference. Whether we say it's mukseh avodah zarah and this object is not being able to be used for other things, let's say, huge difference between saying we're going to stone you based on that. And that's a big difference. But those are two different opinions. There's actually some more differentiations. I'm not going to get into everything. And Kiddushin is also very interesting. And this, I think, they didn't want people to take Kiddushin lightly. If you say, I'm betrothing a woman with this, and you give her a ring and she agrees, and then a second later you say, oh, no, I just meant to give you this ring as a gift. I didn't really mean it as for marriage. No, it's really just a gift. And you said it till Kedei Dibor, too late. You're married, okay? You're betrothed, which basically means if you don't want to be betrothed, you don't have to be, but you need to give her a get if she's going to get remarried, right? If she wants to marry someone else, she needs a get. It's what we call the chumrah. We're going to be strict here and require you, even though you change your mind immediately. So don't play around with kiddushin, is what they're telling you. A quick review of our daf. We started with, and with that we got to a new Mishna, which is a nice place to stop. We started with Mar Zutra, who said the halacha is like Rabbi Abba in all those cases, but then it turns out it really wasn't in all those cases, even though it really is, but we didn't need him to tell us that. Oh, we narrowed it down to the two that it was relevant to. Then we got to this and beginning, middle, and end about the matana, and then we had this 3/4-way machloket between which case does that apply to? Only one person, one field, or to the other extreme, maybe even two people, two fields, or something in between. And for that, we saw different opinions, and even different opinions about Rabbi Yochanan himself said. Rav Sheshet tried to prove his opinion, but in the end, he himself rejected it as an absolute proof for himself. But Rav Ashi actually comes and proves his position, but then the Gemara says, but we really hold with him Reish Lakish also, and therefore works it out together. How Reish Lakish could work in with Rabbi Yochanan, and that we got into the Tokadei Dibor issue, and from that we finished with Tokadei Dibor. That we finished for today. Wishing everyone a Chodesh Tov, Shabbat Shalom, and B'Sorot Tovot. May this month bring in more peace to Jews everywhere.